Jake Miller pushed his cleaning cart down the long hallway of the Galactic Council station. The wheels squeaked softly on the smooth metal floor. He had been walking these same halls for 3 years now, but he still felt amazed by the size of this place. The station was bigger than any city back on Earth. The hallway stretched out in front of him like a tunnel with no end. Tall windows showed the stars outside and the blue-green planet below. Jake paused for a moment to look at the view. He never got tired of seeing space like this. Back in Ohio, he used to fix cars and trucks. Now he cleaned floors and emptied trash cans while floating among the stars. A group of tall, crystal-like beings walked past him. They made musical sounds as they talked to each other. Jake knew they were Zephyrians. Their bodies looked like walking diamonds that caught the light and threw rainbows on the walls. They did not look at him as they passed. To them, he was just part of the background, like the walls or the floor. Jake went back to his work. He had learned not to expect much attention from the aliens. Most of them acted like humans did not exist. The few who noticed him at all saw him as just a cleaner, someone who did the dirty work they did not want to do. He stopped at a large door marked with symbols he could not read. Inside, he could hear loud voices arguing. Jake pressed his ear to the door. His translator device helped him understand most of what they were saying. The Zephyrians were angry about something. They kept talking about sacred crystals and stolen property. Jake opened the door quietly and rolled his cart inside. The room was huge, with a table that could seat 50 beings. Only about 20 were there now, but the air felt thick with anger and fear. At one end of the table sat the crystal Zephyrians, their bodies glowing brighter when they got upset. At the other end were the Vorthak, who looked like giant insects with too many arms and black eyes that reflected light like mirrors. Nobody looked at Jake as he began emptying the trash containers around the room. He had learned to move quietly and stay out of the way. The aliens talked as if he was not there at all. "The mining operations must stop," said one of the Zephyrians. Her voice sounded like wind chimes in a storm. "Those crystals are sacred to our people. They have been growing in those caves for 1,000,000 years. A Vorthak clicked his mandibles together, making a sound like breaking sticks. "The crystals grow on worlds with no intelligent life. We harm no one by taking them. Your people claim ownership of rocks on planets you have never even visited." Jake moved to a trash can near the arguing groups. He had cleaned up after these meetings many times before. The two species had been fighting about the same things for months. The Zephyrians said the crystals were religious objects. The Vorthak said they were just minerals that could be used to make better computers and machines. "You do not understand," the Zephyrian said. Her glow was getting brighter and other crystals in the room started to ring with soft music. "When you take the crystals, you break the harmony of entire worlds. The songs of our ancestors are stored in those stones." The lead Vorthak stood up on his 4 legs. He was almost 7 feet tall and his shell was dark green with yellow stripes. "Songs and rocks? This is nonsense. These are valuable resources that can help many species. Your people want to keep them locked away forever based on old stories." Jake finished emptying the trash and moved to clean the water dispensers. Each species needed different kinds of water, and the machines were always getting dirty. As he worked, he listened to the back and forth arguments. He had been fixing things his whole life. First cars, then trucks, then factory machines before he got this job. He understood how things worked, how they broke, and how to make them work again. Listening to these aliens argue, he started to think they were all missing something important. The arguing got louder. More Zephyrians and Vorthak entered the room. Jake could feel the tension building like pressure before a storm. He had seen this happen before in other meetings. When these two groups got really angry, sometimes they broke things or hurt each other. A younger Vorthak near the back of the group caught Jake's attention. This one was smaller than the others, with lighter-colored shell. Jake had seen him before, in the maintenance areas working on computer systems. Unlike the others, this Vorthak sometimes nodded at Jake when they passed in the halls. The young Vorthak looked nervous. He kept looking around the room like he was searching for someone, or something. When his black eyes met Jake's for a moment, Jake saw something that looked like fear. Jake finished his work and started pushing his cart toward the door. As he passed the young Vorthak, he heard him whisper something very quietly. The words were in the Vorthak language, but Jake's translator picked them up. "They do not know the truth," the young alien said. "Someone is lying to everyone." Jake kept walking like he had not heard anything, but his mind started working. In his 3 years on the station, he had learned that when someone said people were lying, it usually meant someone was making money from the lies. He left the meeting room and continued down the hallway. The space station was always busy, with beings from dozens of different worlds walking around, talking, making deals, and solving problems. Most of them ignored the humans who kept the place clean and running. But Jake had learned something important in his years of being ignored. When people think you cannot hear them or do not matter, they say things they should keep secret. And Jake was always listening. He thought about the young Vorthak's words as he cleaned windows and mopped floors. Someone was lying about the crystal, mines. But who? And why? And what would happen when the truth came out? Outside the windows, the stars looked peaceful and quiet. But Jake had a feeling that things were about to get very dangerous for everyone on the station. Jake was mopping the floor outside the medical bay when the screaming started. It was not the kind of screaming that humans made. This sound was like breaking glass mixed with the howl of wind through a canyon. He had never heard anything like it before. The medical bay doors burst open and 3 Zephyrians rushed out. Their crystal bodies were flashing red and orange, colors Jake had never seen them show before. Behind them came Dr. Patricia Williams, the human doctor who ran the medical bay. Her face was pale and her hands were shaking. "Get Admiral Grant right now," Dr. Williams shouted to her assistant. "Tell her we have a dead Zephyrian and it looks like murder." Jake kept mopping, but he moved closer to the medical bay entrance. The Zephyrians were making that terrible sound again. Other aliens in the hallway stopped to stare. Some of them backed away when they saw how upset the crystal beings were. Within minutes, Admiral Lisa Grant arrived with her security team. She was a tall woman with gray hair who had been running the station for 5 years. Jake had cleaned her office many times and knew she was tough but fair. "What happened?" Admiral Grant asked Dr. Williams. "The Zephyrian ambassador's daughter," Dr. Williams said. "She was found dead in her quarters 2 hours ago. The body shows signs of Vorthak bioweapon poisoning." Jake's mop stopped moving. He knew the ambassador's daughter. Her name was Crystal Song at Dawn, and she was young for a Zephyrian, maybe, only 100 years old. She had always been polite to Jake, sometimes even saying hello when she passed him in the hallways. The Zephyrians started making their glass-breaking sound again. One of them, who Jake recognized as the ambassador himself, stepped forward. When he spoke, his voice made the windows in the hallway vibrate. "The Vorthak have killed my daughter," he said. "This is an act of war. We will not let this crime go unpunished." Admiral Grant held up her hands. "Ambassador, please. We need to investigate this properly. We cannot jump to conclusions." "There is no need to investigate," the ambassador said. "The evidence is clear. Only the Vorthak use these bioweapons. They have murdered my child to stop the peace talks." Jake pushed his mop bucket to the side and started cleaning the windows, near the group. He wanted to hear everything that was being said. The translator in his ear was picking up side conversations between the security officers and medical staff. Dr. Williams was explaining to Admiral Grant what she had found. The victim was poisoned with a compound that attacks the nervous system. It is similar to Vorthak bioweapons, but there are some differences I cannot explain yet. "What kind of differences?" Admiral Grant asked. "The poison was too pure, too concentrated. Most Vorthak bioweapons have other chemicals mixed in. This one was almost like it was made in a laboratory instead of produced by a living Vorthak." Jake kept listening as he cleaned. That seemed important, but none of the security officers seemed to think it mattered much. Within an hour, the news had spread through the entire station. The Vorthak delegation was demanding to meet with Admiral Grant. They were angry that anyone would think they had killed the young Zephyrian. Jake could hear them clicking and buzzing with rage as they gathered. In the main conference room, Jake took his cleaning supplies to the conference room and started working on the floors. The Vorthak were there, along with what was left of the Zephyrian delegation. The tension in the room was so thick Jake could almost taste it. The lead Vorthak, whose name was Hive Mind Speaks Truth, clicked his mandibles angrily. We did not kill the young crystal singer. The Vorthak do not murder innocents, especially not the children of diplomats. Then explain the bioweapon, the Zephyrian ambassador said. His crystal body was still flashing red with anger. Only your people make such poisons. Many species have studied our bioweapons, Hive Mind Speaks Truth replied. The knowledge is not secret. Anyone could have made a copy of our compounds. Jake was wiping down the chairs when he noticed something strange. The young Vorthak he had seen before was sitting in the back of the room and he looked terrified. His shell was much paler than usual, and he kept looking around like he expected someone to attack him. The meeting got worse as it went on. Both sides accused the other of lying. The Zephyrian said the Vorthak had killed Crystal Song at dawn to scare them away from the disputed worlds. The Vorthak said the Zephyrians had killed their own daughter to make the Vorthak look guilty. Admiral Grant tried to keep everyone calm, but Jake could see she was losing control of the situation. When beings got this angry, war started. And when war started between species this powerful, millions of people died. As Jake worked, he kept thinking about what Dr. Williams had said. The poison was too pure, too perfect. It was like someone had made a better version of Vorthak bioweapons. But who would do that, and why? The meeting ended with both delegations storming out in different directions. Jake was left alone in the conference room with Admiral Grant and her security chief, Colonel Robert Hayes. This is bad, Colonel Hayes said. Both sides are calling. They're war fleets. We could have shooting starting within days. Admiral Grant sat down heavily in one of the chairs Jake had just cleaned. 3 years of peace talks and it all falls apart because of one murder. I do not understand how this happened. Jake finished his cleaning and started pushing his cart toward the door. As he passed Admiral Grant, she looked up at him. Jake, you have been on this station a long time. Have you noticed anything strange lately, anyone acting different? Jake stopped pushing his cart. Most of the time, the officers did not ask him questions. They just expected him to do his job and stay out of the way. I have seen some things, Jake said carefully. But I am not sure they are important. Right now, everything might be important, Admiral Grant said. What did you see? Jake thought. About the young Vorthak who had whispered about lies. He thought about Dr. Williams saying the poison was too pure. He thought about Crystal Song at dawn, who had always been kind to him. The young Vorthak in the back row, Jake said. He looks scared. Not angry like the others. Scared like he knows something bad is going to happen. Admiral Grant and Colonel Hayes looked at each other. Which young Vorthak? Colonel Hayes asked. The one who works in the computer sections. He has lighter colored shell than the others. He was in the meeting just now, sitting in the back. Admiral Grant stood up. We need to talk to him before the Vorthak delegation leaves the station. But when they checked, the young Vorthak was already gone. His name was Technical Mind Seeks Answers, and he had left the station on an emergency shuttle just after the meeting ended. He had told the docking bay that he needed to deliver urgent messages to the Vorthak homeworld. Jake went back to his cleaning, but he could not stop thinking. Technical Mind Seeks Answers had been scared, not angry, and now he was running away, right after Crystal Song at dawn was found dead. That did not seem like a coincidence. Outside the station windows, Jake could see the first Vorthak warships arriving. They were dark, ugly things that looked like giant beetles floating in space. The Zephyrian fleet would not be far behind. Jake pushed his mop bucket down the hallway and wondered how many people were going to die because of one young Zephyrian's murder. He also wondered if Technical Mind Seeks Answers was running away, because he was guilty, or because he knew who the real killer was. Most of the humans on the station were leaving. Jake watched them pack their bags and hurry to the transport ships that would take them back to Earth. His boss, Carl Thompson, came to find him in the maintenance room. Jake, you need to get on. The next transport, Carl said. This place is going to become a war zone. The Zephyrian and Vorthak fleets are already shooting at each other near the border worlds. Jake was fixing a broken air filter. He did not look up from his work. Someone needs to keep this place running. The life support systems break down if nobody maintains them. That is not your problem anymore, Carl said. Admiral Grant is evacuating all non-essential personnel. That includes us. Jake finally looked up at his boss. What about the refugees? There are thousands of families from the border worlds living in the emergency shelters. Who is going to keep their air and water working if we all leave? Carl was quiet for a moment. He knew Jake was right. The station was full of scared families who had nowhere else to go. If the life support systems failed, they would all die. Fine, Carl said. But I am putting in the paperwork that says you volunteered to stay. If you die here, it is not my fault. After Carl left, Jake went back to his work, but he was not really thinking about air filters. He was thinking about Crystal's song at dawn and Technical Mind Seeks answers. Something about the whole situation did not make sense. That night, when most of the station was asleep, Jake used his master keycard to get into areas he was not supposed to visit. As the head maintenance worker, his keycard opened almost every door on the station. Admiral Grant had given it to him so he could fix emergency problems anywhere. Jake started in Technical Mind Seeks Answers' old work area. The young Vorthak had been working in the computer systems that controlled communication between different parts of the station. Jake knew these systems well because he had to clean around them every day. The work area looked normal, but Jake noticed that one of the computer terminals had been wiped clean. Not just turned off, but completely erased. That was strange. When workers left their jobs, they usually just logged out. They did not erase everything. Jake sat down at the terminal and started poking around in the maintenance logs. Every computer on the station kept records of what had been done to it and when. Most people did not know about these logs, but Jake had learned to read them when he needed to figure out why machines were breaking. What he found made his stomach feel cold. Technical Mind Seeks Answers had been accessing files that had nothing to do with his job. He had been reading communication records between different species, mining reports from the disputed worlds, and even security files about the peace talks. But the most interesting thing was a series of meetings. According to the computer logs, Technical Mind Seeks Answers had been meeting with Crystal Song at dawn in secret for the past 6 months. They had been using a maintenance room in an old section of the station that nobody visited anymore. Jake printed out the meeting logs and put them in his pocket. Then he went to find that maintenance room. The old section of the station was dark and quiet. This part had been built first, when the station was much smaller. Now newer sections had better facilities, so nobody came here except for Jake when something broke. Jake found the maintenance room and used his keycard to open it. Inside, he found something that made his heart beat faster. Hidden behind some old equipment were data crystals, the kind that Zephyrians used to store information. But these crystals were not glowing like healthy Zephyrian crystals should. They were dark and cracked. Jake carefully picked up one of the crystals. He knew from his maintenance work that cracked crystals could still hold information, but they were dangerous to read. If you did it wrong, the crystal could shatter and destroy everything stored inside. Jake took the crystals back to his maintenance room and used a special reader that he had fixed many times before. Slowly, carefully, he began to pull information from the damaged crystals. What he found made him sit down hard in his chair. Crystal Song at Dawn and Technical Mind Seeks Answers had been working together on a secret investigation. They had discovered that the disputed worlds were being mined, but not by the Zephyrians or the Vorthak. A third group was taking the crystals and making it look like the two species were stealing from each other. The secret miners were the Nexari, a species that sold weapons and technology to other civilizations. Jake knew about them because they had representatives on the station, but they always kept to themselves and acted very polite and helpful. According to the data crystals, the Nexari had been using robot miners to harvest crystals from the disputed worlds. They made some of the mining sites look like Zephyrian operations and others look like Vorthak operations. Each side thought the other was stealing from them, which made them angry enough to start fighting. But Crystal Song at Dawn and Technical Mind Seeks Answers had figured out the truth. They had found evidence that the Nexari were behind everything. They were planning to present their evidence to the peace talks and expose the conspiracy. Jake kept reading. The last entries in the crystals were from just days before Crystal Song at Dawn was murdered. She had written that she was scared, Someone had been following her, and she thought the Nexari knew about their investigation. Technical mind seeks. Answers had written that they should be careful. He wanted to hide copies of their evidence in case something happened to them. The last entry was from him, written just hours before Crystal Song at Dawn died. I fear we have waited too long. The Nexari suspect us. If something happens to Crystal Song, I will run and hide until I can find someone to help. The evidence must survive even if we do not. Jake sat back in his chair and tried to think. Crystal Song at Dawn had been murdered to stop her from revealing the truth. Technical Mind Seek's answers had run away because he knew he would be next. The Nexari had started a war between two powerful species so they could sell weapons to both sides and steal resources from the disputed worlds. It was a perfect plan. The Zephyrians and Vorthak would fight each other until they were both weak and poor. The Nexari would get rich selling them weapons, and they would have the disputed worlds all to themselves. But Jake had a problem. He was just a janitor. Who would believe him if he told them about this conspiracy? Admiral Grant might listen, but she was too busy trying to prevent a war to pay attention to a maintenance worker with a crazy story. Jake looked at the cracked crystals on his desk. This was evidence that could stop a war and save millions of lives. But if he tried to present it and people did not believe him, the crystals might be destroyed, and the truth would be lost forever. He needed more proof, something that even the most important people on the station could not ignore. Jake spent the rest of the night reading through maintenance logs and security records. He was looking for anything that connected the Nexari to Crystal Song at Dawn's murder. His eyes were tired and his back hurt from sitting at the computer, but he kept working. Just as the artificial dawn was beginning to light up the station, Jake found what he was looking for. On the night Crystal Song at Dawn died, a Nexari had requested access to the security system controls. He said he needed to update some software for better protection. The request had been approved because the Nexari were trusted allies. But Jake knew from his maintenance work that the security system had not needed any updates. It had been working perfectly. Jake smiled for the first time in days. The Nexari had used their access to the security system to get into Crystal Song at Dawn's quarters and kill her. Then they had probably erased the security recordings to hide their crime. But they had made one mistake. They had not thought about the maintenance logs that tracked every change made to the station's systems. And Jake was probably the only person on the station who knew how to read those logs properly. Now he had real evidence. Evidence that could prove the Nexari were murderers and stop the war before it destroyed both the Zephyrian and Vorthak civilizations. The question was what to do with it. Jake had been awake for 2 days straight, but he could not sleep. Every few hours, news came in about the war. The Zephyrian and Vorthak fleets were destroying each other's ships. Whole colonies were being evacuated as the fighting spread to more star systems. The station was now full of refugees. Families from a dozen different species crowded into emergency shelters. Jake worked around the clock to keep the life support systems running. The air recyclers were not designed to handle this many people, and the water purifiers kept breaking down. But Jake was also working on something else. He had been studying the Nexari delegation's schedule and learning about their activities. On the station, they had a big presentation planned for today. They were going to demonstrate new weapons technology to potential buyers. The timing was perfect. With the war going on, everyone wanted better weapons. The Nexari were expecting to make huge profits selling their advanced technology to both sides of the conflict. Jake knew this was his chance. If he could expose the Nexari conspiracy during their weapons demonstration, everyone would see the truth at the same time. But he needed to be very careful. If he made a mistake, the evidence would be destroyed, and no one would ever know what really happened. Jake spent the morning preparing. He used his maintenance access to study the demonstration room systems. The Nexari would be showing their weapons using the station's power grid and computer networks. Jake knew those systems better than anyone else on the station. The demonstration was scheduled for the afternoon. Representatives from 12 different species would be there, including some very important military officers. Admiral Grant would also attend because the station's security was her responsibility. Jake waited until just before the demonstration began. Then he went to the main power control room and started making changes to the electrical systems. He was very careful to make his modifications look like normal maintenance work. The Nexari weapons needed a lot of power to work properly. Jake set up the power systems to deliver exactly what they needed at first, but then gradually reduced the power in a way that would look like equipment failure. Next, Jake went to the computer control room. The Nexari weapons were controlled by computer programs that connected to the station's main network. Jake planted some special code in the network that would activate during the demonstration. Finally, Jake positioned himself in the maintenance corridor that ran behind the demonstration room. He had a perfect view of everything through the service panels, and he could access the room's systems from there if needed. The demonstration room was packed. Jake could see Admiral Grant in the front row, along with military representatives from species he had never seen before. Everyone looked very serious. With the war going on, they all needed better weapons to protect their people. The Nexari representative was a tall, thin being with purple skin and 4 arms. His name was Prophet Flows Eternal, which Jake thought was a very honest name for someone trying to sell weapons. He stood behind a table covered with strange devices that hummed with energy. Distinguished beings, Prophet Flows Eternal said in a smooth voice. Today we will show you weapons technology that will change how wars are fought. These devices can penetrate any armor and defeat any shield system currently in use. The first weapon looked like a crystal rod about 2 feet long. Prophet Flows Eternal picked it up and aimed it at a target on the other side of the room. When he activated it, a beam of green light shot out and completely destroyed the target. Everyone in the room looked impressed. This weapon was much more powerful than anything most species had seen before. This is the Mark 7 disruptor, Prophet Flows Eternal said. It uses focused energy to break apart matter at the molecular level, very effective against both Zephyrian crystal armor and Vorthak bioshells. Jake smiled in his hiding place. The Nexari was practically admitting that he had designed these weapons specifically to kill Zephyrians and Vorthak. But Jake needed more evidence before he could act. The second weapon was even more impressive. It created a field of energy that could stop any projectile or energy beam. Prophet Flows Eternal demonstrated by having his assistant fire various weapons at him while he stood behind the shield. Nothing could get through. The Mark 7 shield generator, Prophet Flows Eternal announced. Perfect protection against current generation weapons. Your soldiers will be invincible on the battlefield. Now Jake was ready to act. He activated the code he had planted in the computer system. At first, nothing seemed to happen. But Jake had programmed the code to work slowly, so it would not be obvious that someone was interfering with the demonstration. Prophet Flows Eternal moved on to the third weapon. This one was designed to disrupt enemy communications and computer systems. It was supposed to send out electromagnetic pulses that would shut down any electronic device within a mile. But when Prophet Flows Eternal activated it, something went wrong. Instead of sending out a controlled pulse, the weapon started sparking and smoking. The lights in the demonstration room began flickering. Technical difficulty, Prophet Flows Eternal said quickly. These prototypes sometimes need adjustment. But Jake was not done yet. He used his access to the power systems to create a feedback loop that sent too much electricity to the Nexari weapons. One by one, they started malfunctioning. The disruptor began firing randomly around the room, forcing everyone to duck for cover. The shield generator created a field so strong that it started pulling metal objects toward it. The communication disruptor was now sending out signals that interfered with the station's own systems. In the confusion, Jake slipped into the demonstration room through a maintenance hatch. He was carrying a bag with all the evidence he had collected. The cracked data crystals, printouts of the maintenance logs, and records of the Nexari's secret mining operations. Admiral Grant, Jake called out over the noise of the malfunctioning weapons. I need to show you something important. Admiral Grant looked surprised to see Jake in the demonstration room, but she trusted him. She had worked with him for 3 years and knew he was reliable. Jake quickly explained what he had discovered while Prophet Flows Eternal tried to shut down his malfunctioning weapons. The evidence was overwhelming. The maintenance logs proved that the Nexari had accessed the security systems on the night Crystal Song at Dawn was murdered. The data crystals contained proof that the Nexari were secretly mining the disputed worlds. "This is ridiculous," Prophet Flows Eternal said when he heard Jake's accusations. "You are going to believe the fantasies of a human janitor over the word of a respected Nexari business representative?" But Admiral Grant was studying the evidence Jake had brought. She was a smart woman who had been in the military for 30 years. She knew real evidence when she saw it. "Colonel Hayes," Admiral Grant called to her security chief. "Arrest Prophet Flows Eternal and the rest of the Nexari delegation. Charge them with murder and conspiracy to incite war." "You cannot do this," Prophet Flows Eternal protested as the security officers surrounded him. "The Nexari government will file a formal complaint. This will cause a diplomatic incident. The only incident here is that you murdered an innocent young woman and started a war to make money," Admiral Grant said. "Jake, how fast can you get this evidence to the Zephyrian and Vorthak fleets?" Jake thought for a moment. "If we broadcast it on all communication channels, both fleets should receive it within an hour. But we need to make sure they believe it. They are so angry right now that they might think it is just propaganda." Admiral Grant nodded. "Then we need to do something dramatic, something that will get their attention and make them listen." Jake had an idea, but it was dangerous. "What if I personally deliver the evidence to both fleet commanders? If a human janitor is willing to fly into a war zone just to tell them the truth, they might believe it is real." Admiral Grant stared at Jake. "That is the craziest plan I have ever heard. You could be killed before you even get close to their ships." "Maybe," Jake said. "But if I do nothing, millions of people are going to die in this war. And it is all based on lies." Admiral Grant was quiet for a long moment. Around them, her security team was cleaning up the damaged Nexari weapons and arresting the conspirators. Finally, she made her decision. "Okay, Jake, but you are not going alone. I am giving you a ship and a crew of volunteers, and I am sending copies of all the evidence to Earth just in case something happens to you." Jake smiled. For the first time since Crystal Song at Dawn had been murdered, he felt like there was hope of stopping the war. "When do we leave?" he asked. The small Earth ship UES Endeavor was not built for war. It was a simple transport vessel with no weapons and very light armor. But it was all Admiral Grant could spare for Jake's mission. Jake sat in the pilot's seat next to Dan Harris, a young man who had volunteered to fly the ship. Behind them, Amy Rodriguez worked at the communication station. She would help Jake talk to the alien fleets when they found them. "Are you sure about this plan?" Dan asked as they left the station. "We are flying into the middle of a war zone in a ship that could not fight off a space pirate, much less a military fleet." Jake looked out at the stars ahead of them. Somewhere, out there, two huge fleets were destroying each other based on lies. "I am sure," he said. "This is the only way to stop the killing." They had been flying for 6 hours when Amy picked up the first signals from the war zone. The radio chatter was full of battle reports and emergency calls. Ships were being destroyed faster than rescue crews could save the survivors. "Contact ahead," Dan said, looking at his scanner. "It looks like a Zephyrian patrol group. 3 ships, and they are heading straight for us." Jake activated the ship's communication system. "Zephyrian vessels, this is Jake Miller aboard the Earth ship Endeavor. I have urgent information for your fleet commander. Information that could end this war." The response came back immediately. The Zephyrian voice sounded like singing mixed with static. "Earth vessel, you are in a restricted war zone. Turn back immediately or you will be destroyed." "I cannot turn back," Jake said. "I have evidence that proves the Nexari started this war by murdering Crystal Song at Dawn. Your people and the Vorthak are fighting each other for nothing." There was a long pause. Then the Zephyrian spoke again. "You knew Crystal Song at Dawn?" "Yes," Jake said. "She was always kind to me on the station. She did not deserve to die for trying to find the truth." Another pause. Jake could see the Zephyrian ships getting closer on the scanner. If they decided he was lying, they could destroy the Endeavor in seconds. "Follow us," the Zephyrian finally said. "But if this is some kind of trick, you will not live to regret it." The Zephyrian ships escorted the Endeavor deeper into the war zone. Jake could see the wreckage of destroyed vessels floating in space. Some of them were huge warships that had carried thousands of crew members. Now they were just twisted metal and broken dreams. The Zephyrian fleet was massive. Jake counted over 200 ships of all sizes, from small fighters to giant battleships, that were bigger than the space station. They were formed up in a battle formation, ready to fight the Vorthak fleet that was somewhere nearby. The flagship was a beautiful crystal ship that looked like a floating cathedral. Jake's little transport was brought inside a docking bay that could have held 50 ships the same size. Jake, Dan, and Amy were escorted through corridors made of living crystal that hummed with soft music. Everything on the ship was beautiful, but Jake could feel the sadness of the crew. They were fighting a war they thought was necessary, but none of them wanted to be here. The fleet commander was an ancient Zephyrian whose crystal body was so old it had turned almost transparent. His name was Harmony of the Spheres, and when he spoke, his voice made the entire room vibrate. "Human Janitor," Harmony of the Spheres said, "you claim to have evidence about my daughter's death. Show me what you have found." Jake carefully presented the cracked data crystals and the maintenance logs. He explained how Crystal Song at Dawn and Technical Mind Seeks Answers had discovered the Nexari conspiracy. He showed the records that proved the Nexari had accessed the security systems on the night she was murdered. Harmony of the Spheres listened to everything without interrupting. When Jake finished, the old Zephyrian was quiet for a long time. The crystal walls of the room rang with a sound like distant bells. "If this is true," Harmony of the Spheres finally said, "then my daughter died trying to prevent this war, and we have been fighting the wrong enemy." "It is true," Jake said, "but I need you to help me prove it to the Vorthak. They will not believe me if I go to them alone." Harmony of the Spheres called his communications officer. "Send a message to the Vorthak fleet. Tell them we want to meet under a flag of truce. Tell them a human has evidence that will interest them." It took 2 hours to arrange the meeting. The Vorthak were suspicious, but they agreed to send a small group to the neutral zone between the two fleets. Jake and his team transferred to a Zephyrian diplomatic shuttle for the meeting. The Vorthak ship that met them was dark and angular, like a giant insect made of metal. Inside, everything was designed for beings with multiple arms and compound eyes. The air smelled strange, like chemicals and machinery. The Vorthak commander was Hive Mind Speaks Truth, the same leader Jake had seen in the peace talks on the station. His black eyes reflected the light as he listened to Jake's evidence. "The young Technical Mind Seeks Answers," Hive Mind Speaks Truth said when Jake finished. "He came to us with fragments of this same story, but we thought he was simply afraid of being blamed for the Crystal Singer's death." "Where is he now?" Jake asked. "Hidden on our homeworld under the protection of the Hive Elders. If what you say is true, then he has been trying to tell us the truth all along." Jake felt relieved. Technical Mind Seeks Answers was alive and safe. "Will you help us expose the Nexari conspiracy?" Hive Mind Speaks Truth clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. "The evidence is convincing, but our fleets have been fighting for days. Many have died on both sides. It will not be easy to convince our people to stop the war based on the word of a human janitor. Then we need to do something that will get everyone's attention," Jake said. "Something that will make both fleets stop fighting and listen." Harmony of the Spheres had an idea. "The Nexari have mining operations on the disputed worlds. If we can capture one of their facilities and broadcast the evidence from there, no one will be able to deny the truth." Within hours, Jake found himself on a joint Zephyrian Vorthak mission to one of the disputed worlds. It felt strange to see the two species working together instead of fighting. Their soldiers moved carefully around each other, but they were united in their desire to find the truth. The Nexari mining facility was hidden underground, operated entirely by robots, but the computers contained records of everything they had been doing. Jake helped the alien technicians break into the systems and retrieve the data. What they found was even worse than Jake had expected. The Nexari had been mining these worlds, for years taking resources worth billions and selling weapons to dozens of species. They had started at least 3 other wars using the same tactics they had used on the Zephyrians and Vorthak. Jake stood in the Nexari control room and activated the communication system that connected to both fleets. Soldiers from both species stood behind him as witnesses. "This is Jake Miller," he said into the transmitter. "I am broadcasting from a secret Nexari mining facility on Disputed World 7. I have proof that the Nexari have been stealing from these worlds for years and using the theft to start a war between the Zephyrians and Vorthak." Jake presented all the evidence they had found. The mining records, the weapon sales, the communication intercepts that showed Nexari agents talking about starting the war. Everything was there in black and white. The response from both fleets was immediate. The fighting stopped as ship commanders called for ceasefires to review the evidence. Within hours, both sides had agreed to end the war and work together to prosecute the Nexari for their crimes. Jake's mission was over, but he stayed to help with the cleanup. The Zephyrians and Vorthak worked together to shut down the illegal mining operations and arrest the Nexari agents who had been running them. Technical Mind Seek's answers came out of hiding and helped explain how he and Crystal Song at Dawn had discovered the conspiracy. The young Vorthak was no longer afraid. He was proud that their work had finally brought the truth to light. When Jake finally returned to the space station, he found that everything had changed. The Nexari delegation was in prison awaiting trial. Representatives from both species were working on a peace treaty and a plan to develop the disputed worlds together. Admiral Grant offered Jake a promotion to Chief of Station Security, but he turned it down. "I like my job," he said. "Someone needs to keep this place clean and running properly." But Jake did accept a new title. He was now the Special Maintenance Consultant, with a salary that was 3 times what he had been making before. More importantly, he had the respect of beings from across the galaxy. The other janitors and maintenance workers looked at Jake differently now. They realized that their work was important and that paying attention to details could sometimes change the course of history. Jake went back to mopping floors and fixing air filters, but now when he walked through the station, aliens from dozens of species nodded to him with respect. He had proven that it did not matter what job you had or where you came from. What mattered was doing the right thing when it needed to be done. Outside, his window, the stars looked peaceful again. The war was over and millions of lives had been saved. Jake smiled as he pushed his mop bucket down the hallway. It had been a good week's work.